If I could have everyone's attention, please. We now have a quorum here, and we'll go ahead and start this meeting of the Public Utilities Telecommunications Committee. We have one proposition before us today. It's House Resolution 1365, authored by Representative Bob Smith. And in just a moment, I'm going to recognize him to explain his resolution. But I do know it's dealing with nuclear power. And as this committee may remember, approximately about a month or so ago, we had a gentleman here from Washington, D.C., from the Nuclear Energy Institute, who gave us between 60 and 90 minutes worth of testimony on the aspects of nuclear energy, and we were able to question him and make comments to him and hear his presentation. I thought it was a very, very good, worthwhile presentation. And as a result, partly as a result of that, we have this resolution before us. And Representative Smith, if you would hit your button so I'll know which light to turn on, I'm going to recognize you to present your resolution. Chair recognizes Representative Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. Members of the committee, I bring you House Resolution 1365, which is an urging resolution. I must tell you that I had quite an experience on the floor today on a serious matter, and we had a little fun with it, but about my audiology bill, and we got a little laughter there, but it was a serious matter, but this is a tremendously serious matter for America. We're about to face a crisis in energy, and this is urging the public utilities and the utilities to build more nuclear power plants. And as the chairman alluded to, the Nuclear Energy Institute did come to this committee and did a PowerPoint presentation about the various facets of the energy supply business. And I'd like to cite some of the things that they didn't mention there. And I'll be brief with this because I think we want to hear the comments from both the opposition and those that are for building nuclear power plants. But I would like to tell you some of the top 10 reasons why the nuclear power is vital to Americans' energy policy. Nuclear power helps diversify the U.S. energy portfolio. Nuclear power is an efficient and affordable source of energy. Nuclear power is safe and reliable. Nuclear power does not emit greenhouse gases. Clean air benefits draw new supporters. Recognized environmental leaders like Greenpeace co-founder Patrick Moore, Whole Earth Catalog founder Stuart Brand, and Gaia theory creator James Lovelock have shared their support for nuclear power. Issues like the concern about the potential for global warming have put new emphasis on nuclear power since it does not produce greenhouse gases. Number 6, progress is being made toward development of a used fuel disposal facility, which is in Yucca Mountain in Nevada. Number 7, national leaders support the development of nuclear power, and the Energy Policy Act of 2005 gave incentives for utilities to move ahead on this. Very huge tax incentives. Number 8, the financial community has positive views about the nuclear power, and nuclear power is a trusted technology abroad. In France is one of the environmentally friendly countries in the entire world. They produce around 78 to 80% of their energy needs through nuclear power. So it's time for America, and particularly Georgia, since we do have 2 locations that we can expand, to move forward in that. And the purpose for this is to open the discussion up and let Georgians know that we are serious about this energy problem that we have. If you just look back to the fall of last year, Katrina roared through, and we lost the capacity for delivering natural gas. We're working on liquid natural gas through Trinidad and Tobago and other through the Elba Island regasification facility off the coast of Georgia, crown jewel of Georgia. There are a number of resolutions pending today relating to offshore drilling and other means of trying to cope with our energy crisis as we move forward. Right now, Georgia's about 9.5 million people, and every 5 years we're growing by another 1 million people. that means more people, more cars, more trucks, more everything, and more demand on our energy supply. I want to talk about production costs, and I'm sure that some of the presenters will do this today. From 1995 to the year 2004, the U.S. electricity production costs are as follows: nuclear, 1.68, coal, 1.92, gas, 5.87, and oil, 5.39. So as you can see currently, with using nuclear power, it is a much less expensive means of producing energy for our American citizens. There are a number of issues out there today, that number of energy types out there: natural gas, liquid natural gas, coal, oil, biomass is being considered in Georgia, and we're moving very quickly on that in Georgia and offering incentives, tax incentives for these type of energy usage, producers. And then there's nanotechnology. Georgia Tech is working on a fuel cell initiative that would generate some types of energy needs, but it's in the future, very distant future, but it's coming. So having said that, Mr. Chairman, I urge you to pass this resolution urging the Public Service Commission and the utilities to move as quickly as we can to move toward creating more nuclear power producing plants. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I urge your favorable consideration to this very, very important matter for the state of Georgia and for America. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Smith. Does any member of this committee have a question they'd like to ask the presenter? If you do, just press your button. No questions of the presenter? All right, we'll move into some of our guests out here who have signed up to present testimony. First, I'm going to recognize an elected official in this state with the Public Service Commission, Commissioner Doug Everett. If you wouldn't mind taking the podium, and just for the record, if you would, of course, state your name and where you reside and who you represent, although I've just announced it. I'd like to ask you to take the microphone, if you would, please.
Speak for the Public Service Commission unless we are all here together at the same time. But I did want to come over here in support of this resolution. And the reason I want to come over here and support it is because of a lot of the facts that's been represented by some people on the nuclear power plants, and one of them is cost. Earlier, Representative Smith, he read from a sheet that I had handed out earlier on the U.S. electricity production cost of nuclear 168, coal 192, gas 587, oil at 539. And that's cents, by the way, not dollars, and that's per kilowatt hour. However, that has stopped in 2004, the end of 2004. It does not include last year, 2005, when gas and coal, fossil fuel shot sky high. In fact, it shot so sky high up in this month, Georgia Power will be filing a fuel cost recovery case of $744 million that will have to be added to the ratepayers because of the extremely high coal and fuel that has occurred in this past year. Nuclear does not have that problem. And a lot of times people say, well, the plant costs too much to build. That's something else I wanted to talk to you about. On the a plant that's on a combined cycle plant that has the exact same generation capacity of a fossil fuel plant and the exact same fuel generation capacity of nuclear power, after you add all expenses, that's production cost, that's the building of the plant, that's operation and maintenance, that's interest on the money spent, that's depreciation of the buildings, Combined cycle gas is 6 to 9 cents per kilowatt hour. Pulverized coal is 6 to 8 cents per kilowatt hour. Nuclear, 4 to 7 cents per kilowatt hour. So not only is the nuclear energy much cheaper on production costs, it's cheaper after everything on combining the plant and the cost of construction and everything into the price. Representative Smith was also talking about safe and reliable. Nuclear energy is probably the safest we've got. A lot of people look at you and say, man, you got to be crazy. How about 3 Mile Island? How about Chernobyl? Well, let's take Chernobyl first. There was a disaster in Chernobyl over in Russia, but they do not have the same type of plants that we have. They do not have containment domes. All they have, their plants are built into a building similar to this that does nothing but keep the weather out. When they had a steam explosion, it blew the roof off and part of it and set the place on fire and the smoke. That can happen and has never happened with a containment dome. Then we can look at 3 Mile Island. 3 Mile Island was a result of it not shutting down because of man trying to stop it, trying to stop and not letting the plant stop in itself the way it was supposed to design. There's a place out west called Argonne West. It's out in Idaho Falls, Idaho. That is where all the nuclear plants are designed. It's about 90 miles north east of Idaho Falls. I was waiting for Mr. Bridges to get set down. But they have their own nuclear plant reactor there. They took that reactor and they put it in the same scenario as 3 Mile Island, and they even made it go further. That plant worked exactly like it was supposed to work. It shut itself down. They were back up running in just a couple of days instead of 2 to 3 years like at 3 Mile Island. If they'd have let the plant alone, let it do what it's supposed to do, we wouldn't have been hearing about 3 Mile Island the way we have been hearing about it. Nuclear power does not emit greenhouse gases, I believe you stated. And that is true. In fact, 73% of electricity from all emission-free sources, including hydroelectric, is from and wind and solar. 73% of emission-free electricity is generated by nuclear power. How can you get up there and fight against clean air, against the fact that you don't want to have coal, you don't want to have nuclear, you don't want to have others, and saying we don't want nuclear when it's actually cleaner than all the rest of them combined? It doesn't make sense to me. The second thing is, well, say we're going to do something else. Let's go to wind. Wind costs nearly 15 cents per kilowatt hour. Well, forget that. Too expensive. Let's go to solar. We don't have any fuel costs in solar. It costs 50 to 67 cents per kilowatt hour for solar energy today. 50 to 67 cents with no fuel cost. I don't believe that's exactly what we want to pay, make our ratepayers pay. I believe we want the lower cost, the safety. We want the reliable energy, one that's in base rates that can maintain reliability. And we've also heard, well, Georgia Power and Southern Power, they want to sell off a lot of our electricity to wholesale outside of the state. There's a law that's in the state that states that they can only sell the high-cost electricity. The cheaper fuel, or electricity rather, must stay within the state. If they have electricity that's not needed, the cheap fuel, the nuclear, must stay here for our ratepayers. They can sell the high-cost energy and sell it out of state on wholesale. And when they get rid of high-cost energy, that brings the energy down even more because you don't have it. And then going on, we talk about Yucca Mountain. A lot of people saying that that'll never be built. I kind of disagree with them. I think it will be. I've been to Yucca Mountain, and I'm sure some of y'all have been to Yucca Mountain. It's a nice facility. They put money into it every year. They'll be putting over $500 million in it this year to keep it going. The President, Congress, and the courts have already said it will be constructed. And I kind of believe them more so than I believe these naysayers. I believe that they will be. But what if it's not constructed right now? We have private firms, companies that we can send our solid waste to, nuclear waste to right now. We have over 40 metric tons of nuclear waste out there. We have one facility that's just about to open up out in Utah that's already been permitted that can accept over that 40 million tons. I cut it short for you. Let me get down to, yes, it is in my backyard. 83% of the people that live in and around the United States next to a nuclear power plant, 83% want them expanded because they're good neighbors. 70% of the people in the United States want to expand nuclear. And then the $55 million, let me just take 1 second. That $55 million, before, when a plant was built back in the 70s and up in the early 80s, you did not get a permit to operate that plant until after that plant was constructed. They changed Vogel 3, 4, 5 times. Some of it they had to tear slap down because the rules kept changing on them. New administrations are coming in. And 3 Mile Island happened. That can't happen now with the new system. And that's what the $55 million is to test that system. It's to test it to make sure that everything goes right because it will be permitted prior to construction. So you won't have that problem. So the buildings we build, the plant will be much cheaper to construct because of it. But that money does not even get to start being paid out for nearly 10 years. It's just like if you were to be building a large building like we're standing in right now, you're going to have design costs, you're going to have surveys, you're going to have permits, you're going to have a lot of stuff that's going to have to be spent. And by law, any money spent by the electric company can be recovered. But just to let you know, if you hadn't guessed by now, I am for, and I hope this y'all can see for to present this and affirmative vote. Thank you.
If you would just stick around for a minute, I think we have a question for you. But thank you for your comments, and I'd ask you to stay around for the meeting if your time will allow. Representative Forster, you have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Commissioner. Just a couple of points of clarification. I taught about Chernobyl and TMI. Chernobyl, there are major design differences in the different plants, and like you said, they did not have a containment building. But also during that incident, a lot of people don't understand it was not a nuclear explosion. It was, one part was, like what you said, a steam explosion, and the second was a graphite explosion. They have a design difference of a positive reactivity coefficient. All right, what that means is the hotter it gets, the more faster power is produced. And I just want to point out, in the United States, we have a negative reactivity coefficient, which means as power increases, it shuts itself down. Yucca Mountain, one thing to point out there also is we have this facility pretty much ready. A lot of nuclear plants throughout the nation store the majority of their nuclear waste, which is spent fuel, on site. In France, of which you mentioned, they reprocess the fuel and just use it again. And that was one thing that we need to look at also as we progress with the
I agree with you on that 100% because of the fact that when rods, basically, we're only using about 7-8% of that nuclear power out of those rods. Well, when in France, after they reprocess, recycle, they're getting down to where they're using 80 to 85% of that fuel. Jimmy Carter, when he was president, he stopped that reprocessing because of the fact he was afraid uranium was going to be building up in plutonium, and every president since then, because it was producing weapons-grade plutonium, has agreed with him. However, the present president does not agree with him, and over $220-some-odd million was earmarked strictly for what you're talking about just recently in the last couple of months.
We've seen France do it over these many years.
Right.
I appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
Okay, just if you would, Representative Amerson was next.
My friend, you're not quite in the well, but almost. I remember when you were. My question, to some extent, was stolen by Representative Forrester here. How many metric tons of waste did you say we have?
Approximately 40 tons. metric tons. And it's stored at 73 different sites around the United States of 200 and some odd plants.
Are you familiar with the size of the area that's needed to hold the waste that the French have generated for the last 25 years?
No, I'm not.
It's about the size of a good barn.
Yeah.
How much space would it take to store our 40 metric tons?
I'm not sure. So the way we store ours now in the dry steel cast, one of those casts is almost the size of a gas tank car. And most of it is stored in that. And the one thing about those casts, they're sitting out in the open unless it's stored in a pool. And those things have been run into by a train at 83 miles an hour and no leakage occurred.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Representative Smith, you had a question?
Relating to the incentives that Congress have passed in 2005,
Right.
I believe it was. Do you recall what those incentives are?
Well, not exactly. I'm sure there will be someone from Georgia Power will be here. I saw a couple of them early, and they can tell you exactly what it is. But exactly to the dollar, I can't tell you.
Any other questions for the Commissioner? All right. Thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate you coming up here. Next, I'm going to ask, as you start to approach the podium, Jenny Honaker, if I'm pronouncing that right. And before you get started, Ms. Honaker, I would like to ask, if I could, everybody who's going to make a presentation up here, if you could keep your comments to about 5 minutes or so, and then make yourself available for any questions from the committee members after you complete your presentation. But if you would please hold them to 5 minutes, and if you wouldn't mind starting out with your name, where you reside, and who you represent, please.
Well,
go ahead.
I'm Janine Honaker. I live in LaGrange, Georgia, and I represent, I hope, the citizens of this country. I'm a public citizen. And I would like to answer some of the questions that you have had misinformation given to you by the promoters of it. I've been studying nuclear power for over past 30 years. And I have an alternate resolution to your H.R. 1365. Whereas nuclear power plants routinely release radioactive pollutants into the air and water that reach the public via the food chain, causing cancer, leukemia, and birth defects. And whereas there have been thousands of studies funded by the taxpayers on what to do with radioactive waste, and still no workable solution. And whereas nuclear power would not continue to exist without massive infusion of taxpayer money via subsidies, including but not limited to, 1, the Price-Anderson Act that protects utilities from liability in case of a severe nuclear accident, and for which homeowners' insurance does not cover. Number 2, bribes to utilities, as mentioned in the 2005 U.S. Energy Bill, and which is one of the reasons given for this body supporting Georgia Power's request for inclusion of, it's now 55, I thought it was 50 million in the rate base. And whereas passing a resolution to support the building of new nuclear power plants in Georgia is rubber stamping future rate increases, construction costs will be paid by ratepayers, causing massive increases in your constituents' electric bills, as evidenced by the escalation of the cost of the Vogtle nuclear power plant from an estimated $600 million to an actual final cost of over $9 billion. And whereas passing Resolution H.R. 1365 supporting rate increases is political suicide. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the House of Representatives that the members of this body reject H.R. 1365. Be it further resolved that this body calls for a complete investigation of the Savannah River site to discover why Westinghouse has only partially emptied a very few of the 51 tanks holding the leftover waste from reprocessing spent fuel for military purposes. But let me say right here that it was reprocessing, and that's what you're talking about now. They've got 51 tanks. Each tank is bigger than the state Capitol Dome. And since 1990, Westinghouse has gotten over $1 billion a year. And yet, at the last I heard, it was only 2 partially emptied tanks. Now, that shows you can't get rid of it. You can change its form, but you can't get rid of it. That's nuclear waste. Although Westinghouse has received over $1 billion annually since 1990 for the environmental cleanup, and there's still as great or greater volume of radioactive waste there as there was prior to 1990. And be it further resolved that this body calls for restoration of radiation monitoring by the state of Georgia for its citizens downriver from Savannah River site and around both Vogel and Hatch nuclear power plants, and that these radiation monitoring results be made immediately publicly available via newspapers and television. And be it further resolved that this body investigate the thousands of sick workers, most of whom have been denied benefits at the Savannah River site, and the health of the workers and the public at and around Vogel and Hatch nuclear power plants. And be it further resolved that the clerk of the House of Representatives is authorized and directed to transmit an appropriate copy of this resolution to every member's constituency, to all state newspapers and all local, national, and cable television stations, to the governor, members of the Senate, to Georgia electric utility companies, and to each member of the Georgia Public Service Commission. And I'm available for questions. And as I said, I have been studying nuclear power since 1974. And let me tell you how I know that it is not emission-free. I fought the Hartsville nuclear plant. I read the environmental report for the Hartsville nuclear plant. A child drinking milk from a cow that would graze near that nuclear plant would have received a dose of radiation, 335 millirems per year. The allowable amount was 15. TVA could have put on filters on the ventilation system of the turbine building and the reactor building and brought the dose down to 38, but that was still more than twice the allowable amount. TVA abolished the calculation method, which had been in effect by NRC up until that point. That calculation method was 1.42. That was abolished. TVA brought in their own calculation method and brought the dose down on paper to 11.1. And then the NRC, instead of enforcing their rules and insisting that TVA install this available technology, abolished guideline 1.42 and brought in guideline 1.109 that brought the dose down to 1.1. Now that is lying on paper. That's making the people think that nuclear plants are not emitting anything. But you bring the dose from 335 to 1.1 and you can claim that it's emission-free.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Honaker. And does any member of the committee have a question? Ms. Honaker?
Yes.
Would you mind answering the question?
I'd be very happy to. Thank you.
Recognize Representative Forrester for a question.
Yes, ma'am. I want to see the evidence that you have that members of this committee are taking bribes. You said that the reason we have this resolution is because we're taking bribes?
No, I said that the utilities are being bribed by the government. It's $500 million that for the first two reactors that are the new ones that are built, and $250 million. It's $500 million for the first two, and then $250 for the next four. And then there was some money up front that was reported in the Atlanta Journal for early siting. Now, I never found out how much that was, but I hope that this committee will ask the public utilities today. And I think that this is bribes.
And do you understand that the subsidies that go to farmers?
Pardon?
Do you understand the subsidies that go to farmers? Would you consider that bribes also?
That is neither. Farming and nuclear power plants are two different things.
They're companies that are getting incentives to do what they need to do. Farmers receive subsidies. Other businesses receive tax credits and tax abatements when they come into areas such as the companies that have come into Georgia over several years to be able to establish here. Do you consider those bribes?
I hadn't considered that.
Well, they're the same thing. We're talking oranges and oranges here. You need to consider that when you're talking about bribing people. I take offense to your resolution. And also, do you live in a brick house?
I do.
You know you're receiving more radiation in your brick house than I would be living within a 5-mile radius of a nuclear plant?
Have you monitored that radiation? Do you know that that's the truth?
Do you? Yes, I do know that's the truth.
Well,
do you
it's
have
not-
do you have a basement in your house?
No, I don't.
If I could just intervene here just 1 minute, y'all can have a conversation later. I appreciate both of y'all's comments here. But was there any other question? That's okay. Press your button so I can turn you on, please. Representative Mangrum, you have a question of Ms. Honaker.
Ms. Honaker, you made several statements that are somewhat inflammatory, as is evident from the previous discourse between yourself and one of my other distinguished members of this committee. And I know that there will be others that would raise very high eyebrows with many of the statements and the conjecture and the opinions and a number of things that you've said. With that having been said, I would like a copy of what you've prepared.
Thank you.
I would like a copy, and I would like to see the facts upon which you rely upon some of your conclusions. And I'm not going to just throw it out with the bathwater, but you've made some claims, and we're at a very serious point. And if you've been studying this since 1974, I believe that's what you said.
That's right.
If you come from an era in which there were a very high level of concern for this area, and we are at the point where we're studying this to serve the state of Georgia, and we want to get all the facts. So if you have some facts that would shed some light, I would ask that you share them, and we won't engage in an argument. But
And
if
I'd
you
be
have some facts.
Thank you. And I'll be very glad to give you the names of very reputable people like the Union of Concerned Scientists and others.
Excuse me, ma'am. Do you have, whether in a report or in written form, documentation supporting the facts and opinions upon which you have propounded before this committee?
If you will give me specifically the ones that you want backup information for, I'll be glad to provide it for you.
Okay.
And I'll be glad to give everybody.
If you would, ma'am, please hold on before you do that. I'm going to ask that we don't allow stuff to be passed out on the full committee, but I would ask that when this meeting is over, anything you would like to leave with us, please present to one of our staff ladies right here, and they will disseminate it among the committee members. And we appreciate your testimony. Any other questions of Ms. Honaker before we move on? All right, thank you. Next, on the opposition side, I'm going to call up Dr. Stephen Smith. If you'd make your way to the podium, and when you get there, Dr. Smith, if you would please, again, iterate your name, where you reside, and who you represent, please. And it'll take about 5 minutes. If you
Sure.
would.
Good afternoon. My name is Stephen Smith. I'm the Executive Director of the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, and our office is at 427 Moreland Avenue here in Atlanta.
Where is it you reside?
I reside in Knoxville, Tennessee.
Okay.
We are a regional group, and I'm down to testify. We would ask that you vote not in favor of this for a number of different reasons, and there's been a number of things that have been alluded to this afternoon, and we can go back and forth on a number of them. But first and foremost, the Public Utility Commission is about to undertake an integrated resource plan. And as you know, that integrated resource plan, if done properly, is where they will look at all the options for producing power on the supply side and all the options on the demand side. And they should go in with a complete open mind and let the facts speak for themselves. By encouraging them to go forward with supporting nuclear power before they're allowed to go into the integrated resource plan, we're afraid that you are biasing that process, and we would ask that you not do that. We would like to see that if nuclear power can compete and is the most cost-effective way, it should be able to stand on its own bottom. Now, a couple of facts that you should be aware of. We've already talked about the significant federal subsidies that are going to support nuclear power. The other thing is that nobody on Wall Street is stepping up to support these plants because they know they're not economical and they know that they're not going to be the way to go. They're too risky of an investment. Therefore, the federal government is having to subsidize this significantly to try to jumpstart the industry because it has not been able to compete on its own bottom before. The other issue is that the Utility Commission now has this proposal for approximately $55 million to basically lock in to the ratepayers for the power company just to contemplate building the nuclear power plant. My understanding is if they choose not to build the nuclear power plant, they're still going to get the $55 million. I think that's unprecedented. Now, we think that what you should encourage them to do is look at diversifying the mix in Georgia. Allow the integrated resource plan to go forward unbiased and find out what is the best cost. I would ask that you adopt a resolution that talks about diversifying the portfolio. If nuclear power is the best way to do it, so be it. We don't believe it will be when you look at the facts. The other thing that's important to remember is that in Georgia, we have an enormous opportunity to support ag-based energy, to encourage rural economic development, to keep money in the state. Those companies that are going to come in and build a new nuclear power plant, the majority of that money is going to leave the state. It's not going to stay in the state. And what I would encourage you to do is have a serious look at pushing forward support for ag-based energy that helps the money stay in the state. Now, a couple of other things that were said earlier that are grossly inaccurate. It is my understanding that the state of Georgia doesn't have 40 metric tons of nuclear waste. They have 1,665 metric tons, and we will provide you documentation for that. That's an inaccurate statement. It is also...
Whoa, hold on, please, Will.
Well, Commissioner Edward, I don't know how you can have less for the whole United States than you do for the state of Georgia. But the issue is we need to get the facts straight, and I think that what should happen is that you should be allowing the IRP process to go forward. The Vogel case, significant cost overruns. I ask you to, if a member of the power company comes up here and gives you a projected cost and what they're going to build the plant for, ask if anybody has ever been able to build that. The most recent examples when the nuclear power plants came up, they were coming in and saying, oh, we can build it at $1,500 a kilowatt. The last nuclear plant that went online was over $3,000 a kilowatt. So what's happening is that these numbers are being grossly deflated as they try to come in here and get you hooked in again, where you start appropriating money through the Public Service Commission, you start reaching into ratepayers' pockets, and you start encouraging them to go down this road, and then you start having the cost overruns, just like we saw with Vogel. Then you start seeing the rate increases. We're all sensitive to the volatility of natural gas. We need to be looking at diversification. But to be honest with you, we already got 20% nuclear power in Georgia. We've got 20% natural gas. We've got over 50% coal. Where's the bio-based energy? And why isn't the power company being a good faith partner in significantly looking at working at demand side management? We struggle with them to be a good faith player, and the Utility Commission has a regulatory disincentive called the RIM test that prevents...
If I could ask you to please wrap it up. You've been there for 5 minutes, and we might have some questions. Or if you could please conclude your comments.
The Utility Commission has a regulatory disincentive for energy efficiency. So I would ask that you step back, don't try to bias the process, let the process go forward, don't lock in ratepayers to these cost overruns, and encourage the Utility Commission to look out for the ratepayers of Georgia, not the shareholders of Georgia Power.
All right. Thank you for those comments. I have a couple of questions. First that came up was Representative Forrester.
Thank you. Dr. Smith, I'm sorry, you said your office in Atlanta?
That's correct. We have an office in Atlanta, Savannah, and other southeastern states.
In Knoxville?
Knoxville. We have an office in Asheville. We have an office in Raleigh.
Just out of curiosity, are you the same Dr. Smith that opposed the similar to Raccoon Mountain plant being developed there in Tennessee, just north of Chattanooga?
You talking about the pump storage facility
Yes.
that was there? Yes, I am.
Okay, just checking. You mentioned.
I'm also the same Dr. Smith that supported the wind turbines that TVA's built and supported the coal gasification that they're looking at and other things like that. So I don't know what your point is about Rocky Mountain.
Okay. With Watts Bar, you talked about the cost. I guess it's a plant you're talking about, the cost of $3,000 per kilowatt hour.
No, that's not the plant I'm talking about. I'm actually talking about the plant that was built in Japan. That's the most recent nuclear power plant. Watts Bar came on at over $7 billion, which is significantly above the $3,000 a kilowatt.
Right. That was
a massive
due to
overrun.
the length of the regulation and hold
No,
up
it was.
costs.
I think if you study it,
For-
you would know that it was due to TVA changed the design criteria for the nuclear plant and got caught by the NRC, and the NRC made him go back and do it right.
Okay. The calculator, when it first came out, it cost a pretty good bit. And then over time, with the increase of technology, costs went down. Is that not correct?
Cost for what?
A calculator.
I'm not. I haven't studied the cost of calculators.
Okay.
I mean, that's an economy of scale reduction, and you don't get an economy of scale by building less than 100 nuclear power plants.
you
You've got to build
understand-
thousands of them.
You understand with the increased technology and knowledge over time, that costs go down.
To some degree, but again, it's the economies of scale of production.
Like we're having a design a design standard design plant. That's what we're looking at, and that's why
That's
costs
never
are
been operational before. There's
And
no
that's why
history of
costs-
how it's going to cost.
and that's why costs are going to be lower than in the past.
Hopefully, but that was the same
So-
logic they used for Westinghouse and GE and
With-
Bechtel and others before.
So, with your logic, are you saying you would rather build a coal plant rather than a new nuclear plant?
We would support, first and foremost, significant energy efficiency investments because that keeps dollars in ratepayers' pockets. Next, we would support an aggressive look at renewables that make sense for Georgia, like biomass, because that keeps money in rural counties in Georgia and it helps diversify the mix. We don't have any biomass in the mix right now, and we need that. So if you want to diversify the mix, you already got 20% nuclear, let's focus on biomass. Then we would support coal gasification over nuclear power because coal gasification is going to be a more robust technology.
And you understand that a coal plant puts out enough waste to fill a train car from Los Angeles to New York, where one nuclear plant would only fill up one train car.
That's inaccurate because coal gasification is a different technology than pulverized coal because you actually create a purified waste stream that can be used as co-products in a coal gasification plant. So you don't have the traditional waste that you do because you actually separate it in the gasifier before you actually run it through combustion. Whereas a traditional pulverized coal plant, you run everything out the stack and then you have to catch it with scrubbers and SCRs, and that's where you create that volume of waste stream.
So
I would be happy to provide you with information about coal gasification. But if we allowed the process to go forward in the integrated resource plan, we would have these facts on the table and we wouldn't bias the process in advance because there's a lot of misinformation.
So you're saying that a coal gasification plant would put out less waste than one nuclear plant?
It depends on what type of waste you're talking about. It puts out no radioactive waste, which then has to be
You're
stored.
saying that the ash is not radioactive from a coal plant?
The ash is not as radioactive as spent fuel.
Oh, but it is radioactive. It's just not as.
As you said earlier, and as you know, everything has a small amount of radioactivity
That's
in it.
exactly right.
But the reality is the volume of that radioactivity that becomes hazardous is concentrated in a nuclear plant and not concentrated in a coal plant.
Thank you, Representative Forrester. Next is Representative Smith for a question.
I just, the real technical give and take there, mine's more entrepreneurial.
Sure.
You mentioned that the Vogel plant had cost overruns. Could it perhaps be that the cost overruns, and this is back in the 70s, was it? Late 60s, 70s?
70s and 80s, that's right.
Could it perhaps be that the cost overruns came as a result of changing administrations in Washington, the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency, and the subsequent increase in cost due to more and more and more layers of environmental restraints and controls and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, that's what the industry would have you believe. The reality is EPA has virtually no regulatory oversight over the nuclear power industry. That's the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And yes, there are changes that basically happen because nuclear power is not necessarily inherently unsafe, but it is inherently unforgiving. And so when they find problems, they build redundant layers of safety into the nuclear power plant. That's what they're hoping to do. And by doing that, they have to go back and re-engineer designs because it is an inherently dangerous technology if it gets out of hand. Now, in a post-9/11 world, we're very concerned about building more of these because they become targets for terrorism. And what happened in the 70s after the industry gained some experience, yes, the NRC went back and did have design changes that were designed to build in safety. The problem is now the NRC is throttling back on some of their oversight. These plants are exceeding their designed life, and most utilities have asked to extend the license on these plants and uprate the output. So in my book, that's a triple play for disaster. You've got a regulatory agency that's throttling back. You've got plants being run longer than they were designed to and harder than they were designed to, and that's of a great deal of concern. So I would encourage you to slow down on advocating for nuclear power, because there's obviously a lot of misinformation that you have before you.
Well, going back to the entrepreneurial side, if I'm building a shopping center and I know what it's going to cost, I get the key in the door on schedule, on time, and on budget. It's one thing, because we still have planning departments that are watching over you, that you do the various things, and sometimes you get red line, blue line, and the like, and you have cost overruns depending upon that. But, and I apologize for not saying EPD and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and so forth, but EPD and EPA did have a play in this, I'm confident. And due to the changing administrations in Washington, this did in fact happen. But how can we in Georgia move forward with any type of good proposal? I call it a good proposal. If the power companies have to have these restraints placed upon them every time. They cannot do it like a shopping center. They start out at $1 billion cost, and before you know it, government regulation steps in, and it costs $2 billion for the same product for the most part, and delay and delay and delay. So, how can we?
Look, I would be happy for the power company to basically be able to go forward and try to build this thing and not have their hands in the back pocket of the ratepayers. See, the problem is when you're building something as an entrepreneur, that's your private money. What's happening with these guys is they're coming in and getting the Public Service Commission to guarantee rate recovery on something that they know that is going to have the cost overruns. And if Wall Street supported this, it would be a different story. Wall Street doesn't support this. You have to have massive federal subsidies, which what we got in the energy bill, and you have to have massive protection for their shareholders, is what they're doing now before the Public Service Commission.
Subsidies are for the first 2-3 plants only, and after that?
We have over 100 nuclear power plants.
But
why are we subsidizing a mature industry? I mean, where's the market forces? Where is the support for market forces, and why don't we let this compete on its own bottom? Why are we encouraging federal subsidization and encouraging the power company to get into the wallets of ratepayers? That's what this resolution does, and you guys are sending a very clear signal that you are embracing the cost overruns and the power company getting their hands in the wallets of the ratepayers, and I don't think that that's a position that citizens of Georgia would want you to do.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. I don't see any more questions, but as you can obviously ascertain, there's some disagreement between your comments and some of the opinions of some of the members of this committee up here. But I would like to mention just one thing to you. You mentioned a subject that is becoming a fast favorite subject of mine when you mentioned biomass, and that should be some of our mix. Tomorrow, I'll be presenting a bill on the House floor that will lead to the first biomass electrical generating plant in Georgia. It will be a 135 megawatt electrical generating plant down in South Georgia, a very rural area, and we're very proud to start that step toward biomass electrical generation. So I just wanted to make you aware of that Georgia is in that game, and we're going to be there, but we also recognize the need for an entire mix of electrical generation.
Well, I would encourage you, when you basically have that plant built, make sure that the Georgia Public Service Commission allows the plant to get online and provide power to the ratepayers, because they've allowed the company to continue to set up roadblocks repeatedly for several companies that have tried to do it. And if we had a balanced IRP...
I hear what you're saying, but I'm going to... In the interest of time,
sure.
We've got several lows. I appreciate your comments.
Thank you all for your
things you
time.
might want a documentation, leave this committee, please see one of our staff ladies after
we
the
have
meeting
a
is
report
over.
that we presented here, and I've got one copy. I'd be happy to provide
Thank
more.
you very much. Just provide it after the meeting, if you would, please. Next, I'm going to go back to the far side, and I'm going to call on Jim Burgess. If you'd take no more than 5 minutes and tell us again, restate your name, where you reside, and who you represent, please.
Mr. Chairman, I am here representing the Municipal Electric Authority of Georgia, I actually reside in the city of Social Circle. The Municipal Electric Authority of Georgia represents some 49 cities, and we provide wholesale electricity to those cities. And we do have a partial ownership interest in Plant Vogtle. This, in my opinion, I think the opponents of this resolution are really overreacting, that the resolution is very consistent with a resolution that our board of directors adopted just recently. And that resolution called for our organization to consider planning for the possible diversification of our portfolio to include possible additional nuclear power source. And I see this resolution not as a resolution where you're asking us to go on and build something, but you're asking us to consider the planning for this as a possible additional expansion of our fuel mix. While we're not saying we're going to go ahead and build it, we're saying we're planning for it. And that's in effect the resolution of our board of directors. And I think that's considered, that's certainly consistent with the resolution here. I do not interpret this resolution that you're trying to mandate us to do something, that you're asking us to begin to plan and to see if this is a good, feasible, and desirable alternative. And so we very strongly support the resolution with that interest in mind. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Burgess. Any member of the committee have a question? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jumping back to the opposition side, next is Neil Herring. It'd take about 5 minutes, and please state your name, where you reside, and who you represent, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Neil Herring. I'm a lobbyist for the Georgia chapter of the Sierra Club. I live in Jessup, Georgia, which is 1 county away from the Hatch nuclear plant. And I hope that I don't inflame anyone. My personal history in this issue goes back, I regret to say, 30 years. In 1976, I first traveled to Waynesboro, Georgia to oppose the relicensing of the Vogtle nuclear plants. Vogtle had been licensed in the early 70s. They had to cancel the license when they canceled a number of nuclear plants in the state because of a financial crisis at the Georgia Power Company. And they decided to relicense a single plant, 2 units at Vogtle. It had been a 4-unit plant. Just for the committee's information, 4 units were planned to go on a site on Lake Oconee. And Lake Oconee, as you know, is now the Reynolds Plantation, which is a much higher and better use for Lake Oconee than a nuclear plant heat sink. And I think that the use of our natural resources in that fashion is something that ought to be kept in mind at all times. But I opposed Vogtle relicensing before the Atomic Energy Commission in its last days. And then President Carter got elected, and they shuffled the bureaucracies and the alphabet agencies, and they got the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And in 1977 and 78, I attended Atomic Safety and Licensing Board hearings in Augusta on the construction permits for Plant Vogtle. At that time, Georgia Power Company had a vice president named Walt Hensley, a retired Marine, excellent man, who testified that the power company was going to install 1,500 megawatts of demand control technology. That's over a nuclear unit in demand control, conservation of demand, not energy conservation. As soon as the construction permits were issued, the power company dropped the demand control program. Walt Hensley retired, and in the next rate case before the Public Service Commission, Walt testified for the consumer interveners, complaining about the end of that program. The cheapest energy available for Georgia is conservation. There's an immense amount of energy available, electric energy available to this state through conservation, meaningful, technologically advanced conservation programs that are cheap. And that's what I would recommend as the first thing for the legislature, the Public Service Commission, and the people of Georgia to look for is let's get the most value out of the plants we already have. And in line with that, Vogtle and Wansley, the last 2 units at Wansley, the 4 units at Sierra, were all built, and the last 2 units at Boy in your hometown, were all built to meet projected demand in the Georgia and Southern Company, Alabama load area that never materialized. They projected load that never occurred. And so they had to deal with a massive overcapacity, chronic overcapacity, which damaged their credit rating. But they succeeded in dealing with it by selling the power out of state. Now, we've been air conditioning Florida for about 25 years by burning coal in Georgia. We've been cleaning Florida's air and Georgia's lungs. We need to bring our power home. That would solve a whole lot of our energy problems in Georgia, is just quit air conditioning Daytona Beach. So I believe that there's another example of a place where we can get power at low cost. The thing that most disturbs me about nuclear power, did then and does now, is the cost to plant. This is the most expensive power in the world. Dr. Smith says it's not inherently unsafe, but it is inherently incredibly expensive. It's interesting to me that you gentlemen, who are all members of the Republican Party, are so happy with the experience of France. It's a socialist enterprise. The nuclear power industry in France and the reprocessing industry is entirely state-owned and operated and subsidized by the taxpayers. We don't really know what the costs are. It's probably pretty efficient because they've been doing it for a long time. But it's a socialist enterprise, and there's no private sector in it. The only other thing I'd like to mention is that there's an endless claim that nuclear power doesn't involve no acid rain, greenhouse gases. In fact, the nuclear fuel cycle and the construction of the plants involves a tremendous amount of fossil fuel and acid rain and greenhouse gases. Mining, milling, separation, fuel assembly, and plant construction all involve huge amounts of fossil fuel. Separation is particularly interesting. That's where they separate the U-235 from the U-238. That's almost entirely coal-fired in this country. TVA separates with coal-fired plants. It's whatever the national power mix is basically. I mean, some of it's nuclear-fired, but it's majority coal-fired. So even clean nuclear power is not clean. I appreciate this opportunity to testify on this subject, and I hope that y'all will reject this. I don't expect you to, but I do wish you'd put in some language about cost stability of plant.
Thank you, Mr. Harry. I have two questions right now, and I think it might have been the socialist comparison that may have raised these questions. First,
I thought that was inflammatory. I'm sorry.
First, I'll recognize our Vice Chairman, Representative Murphy.
Yes, Mr. Herring, I take exception to you saying all the members on this committee, likes what they're doing in France. All we're doing is referencing what they're doing in France as far as their nuclear power. I certainly don't condone anything they do in France. So I would just like to make that
I meant the vocal members, Mr. Murphy. I'm sorry that I made that generalization. You're quite right to point that out.
Next, recognize Representative Forrester.
I believe it was mentioned by Representative Smith earlier. Do you know who Patrick Moore is?
No.
Patrick Moore was a co-founder of Greenpeace, and he came out last year and said that nuclear power was the way to go for the future as far as cleaning our air and keeping the planet clean. Also, Bjorn Lomborg.
I've heard of him.
Bjorn Lomborg, a member of Greenpeace, and I think even Sierra Club.
We got 750,000. $35 you're a member.
Major leader there that also understands that nuclear power is the way to go to keep our environment clean. And one other point, do you realize that your home is 70% powered by coal plants?
Yeah.
Okay, just checking.
Next, recognize Representative Amerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One comment you made that I really appreciate, and that is conservation. And I hope that we can work together in the future and push conservation, because I would like to see credits given for people who will use those methods that conserve fuel. I built a greenhouse heated home back in 1980, and for 15 years my total heating bill was $1,500, and that was $100 a year for 1 cord of wood as backup. And we can do conservation, and I think we need to push that. Thank you.
The program that Mr. Hensley promoted for the power company involved installing a thermostatic switch on customers in Atlanta, Metro Atlanta. They did 10,000 installations that used in excess of 1,500 kilowatt hours a month. And it just switched off people's air conditioner. It cycled it off for 10-minute cycles, and then yours would come on, your neighbors would go off for 10 minutes. And that kind of cycling saved a whole unit's worth of power. I mean, and it's a lot cheaper to put a thermostat on than it is to build a reactor vessel and a containment. You know, I mean, it's just there's no comparison in the cost.
Well, thank you for those comments,
Thank y'all.
Mr. Herring. And I do appreciate the conservation comment, because one thing I learned in dealing with the LNG issue, that since 1980, Georgia energy users have improved efficiency by about 20-25% of their home in the last 25 years. But I would agree we do
The
have
potential's
some more ways
huge.
to
The
go.
potential's immense.
Wait a minute, was there one more question, if you wouldn't mind, Mr. Herring?
No, I don't mind.
Representative Mangrum.
With all due respect, there happens to be one person on this committee that does not happen to be of the majority party. For the record. And my question is, you're with the Sierra Club, and I am sure you have tons of research, tons of literature, and unfortunately I am a novice in this area, and I know we have to do something, and I know that I really need the information, and I would appreciate any information you can share.
Yeah, I'll be glad. We actually have a young lady who's an expert in these energy things, and I'll have her talk to you if that's fine with you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Herring.
Thank y'all.
Next on the same side of the issue is Jill Johnson. Ms. Johnson, if you'd take about 5 minutes in your remarks, and please restate your name, where you reside, and who you represent.
Certainly. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Jill Johnson. I work as an advocate with the Georgia Public Interest Research Group. Georgia PIRG is based here in Atlanta, but we represent more than 4,000 Georgia citizens across the state. We are a statewide nonprofit, nonpartisan advocacy organization that fights for better environmental protections and consumer protections. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak this afternoon.
And if you don't mind, you reside where?
I reside here in Atlanta as well.
Thank you.
Thanks. First, I'd like to say that before the state of Georgia looks at building any new type of energy source, be it a nuclear plant or a coal plant or any new type of energy source, we certainly urge the state to step back and make sure that they have done everything within their power to save energy, energy efficiency, conservation, weatherization of people's homes. We think it's important that we do more because Georgia's not doing enough. We actually rank in the bottom third of states who are implementing energy efficiency policies. We think if we had those policies in place, we'd be doing a better job of saving Georgians money on their gas bills, not because of some supply issue, but because of the supply issue, but also because we can help. Best way to help save consumers money is to help them conserve energy. Lastly, we think, before, again, moving forward with a nuclear plant, we should look at what we're doing to save energy as well as what we're doing to implement clean sources of energy. Again, we support efforts to bring about clean, homegrown energy like biomass, wind power off the coast, solar power, and even landfill gas are all different ways that we can diversify our energy mix. I want to just briefly touch on a couple of concerns we have with nuclear power. One is the waste that it produces. We hear an awful lot about how it's emission-free or doesn't produce greenhouse gases or acid rain. And we're concerned about what happens at the other end of producing nuclear power, which is that it produces a lot of waste that's radioactive, spent fuel, and this is waste that remains radioactive for millions of years, long after we'll be around. We don't have really a permanent storage facility for that waste. Sure, something may happen in the next couple years where Congress decides to move forward with Yucca Mountain or with an alternative site in Utah. And then that's where our concerns really kick in, because we think people need to think more about what will happen to that waste. And the fact is that in order to take the tons and tons of radioactive waste we have in this country to those sites, we are going to be putting them on rail cars. We'll be transporting them on our highways. I don't know if you've driven on the connector recently, but I'm scared enough just to drive down the connector. The thought of putting, as it is, I don't think the thought of putting nuclear waste on our highways makes me feel any better. I'm definitely concerned because if an accident happens on the connector right now between two cars, hopefully people are all right. If an accident happens on one of our highways or railways, as we're taking this waste past our schools, past our homes, past our business centers, the results could be disastrous. So we're very concerned about that. Lastly, just in terms of a threat to security, just to make sure all the members of the committee know, in February 2005, FBI Director Robert Mueller testified before Congress, before the Senate Intelligence Committee, that nuclear power plants have been and continue to be terrorist targets. And then I do want to touch on something that no one else has mentioned yet, and that is how nuclear energy impacts our water here in Georgia. We do have a lot of people coming to the state. We need to make sure we're doing everything we can to have enough clean water. And nuclear energy takes us away from that. These plants require enormous volumes of water to operate and continuously cool their fuel in order to prevent accidents. Here in Georgia, we know that Plant Vogel draws more than 60 million gallons each day from the Savannah River and only returns about a third of that. Similarly, Plant Hatch takes out about withdraws 60 million gallons per day from the Altamaha, only returns about a half of that. And then the water that they do return is often released at high temperatures, which has had serious impacts on plants and our fish, including fish kills. Lastly, I just want to wrap up by saying that earlier today I attended a meeting hosted by the Georgia Environmental Facilities Authority. They announced that the state will be creating a state energy plan. I'd like to suggest that maybe this resolution is a little premature. We should wait until the energy plan moves forward, which is happening rapidly. They expect to have a final energy plan before January of next year, and let all the stakeholders have their say before elevating one type of energy source above another. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for those comments. And if you would, I have one question from Representative Forrester for you.
Sure.
You were mentioning wind and solar. Do you understand the cost effectiveness compared to nuclear or even coal or hydroelectric as far as wind and solar, about how much that would raise the cost of electricity?
I think you have to, if you're looking at all of our energy sources and you want to compare the cost of them, I think you've got to start with a level playing field. I think that right now, wind and solar are more expensive because they are not as heavily subsidized as nuclear energy is. If we took away all of the subsidies and again let these sources of energy compete on a level playing field, I believe you would find that they can compete.
So you're saying that wind and solar is not subsidized?
Not as heavily subsidized as the billions of dollars that nuclear and coal energy receives.
Okay.
If you look at the 2005 energy bill passed by Congress, the subsidies in there for nuclear and coal power far, far outweigh the subsidies for clean sources of energy.
I think you would find comparatively the percentage of subsidy is much larger with wind and solar. Do you understand what the majority of the waste consists of?
I understand that the majority of the waste is highly radioactive.
Do you understand it's not glowing green ooze like on MacGyver, but it's ceramic and solid material?
Certainly, but I also understand we'd be in a pretty serious situation if there were to be an accident with that waste as it was being transported.
Have you seen the protective transportation device and what it would take to do what you're suggesting as far as any kind of accident and radioactive release?
No, sir, I've not.
These transportation devices have been hit by speeding trains, jets, dropped off 10, 20-story buildings, and have sustained the impact. And they're very, very, very safe.
Mm-hmm. We'd love to see some of the facts and background on that. If you'd like to share that with us, that'd be great.
I would absolutely. I think someday, Mr. Chairman, we ought to have an informational session on nuclear power and the transport, and I will show that video. The water usage you mentioned, do you understand that most of the water is returned? When you see a nuclear plant, you see those big stacks? That's not smoke, that's water vapor. A nuclear plant makes electricity in clouds.
Right, but it's not returned in the same form. The water vapor may go up into the atmosphere. The problem is affecting how our rivers flow and whether or not we have enough clean water flowing in our rivers to help grow business and help support our growing economy here in Georgia.
Yeah, the flow is minimum taken. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Next, we have Bill Vernon. Joe Vernon. If you would, take no more than 5 minutes or less, and please restate your name, where you reside, and who you represent.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. My name's Bill Verner. I'm Vice President of Government Relations for Georgia EMC. Reside here in Atlanta. Georgia EMC is the trade association for Georgia's 42 distribution electric cooperatives, and also Oglethorpe Power Corporation, the wholesale power supply cooperative owned by 39 of those EMCs, and Georgia Transmission Corporation, the transmission entity also owned by those EMCs. And we're here today to say we appreciate the efforts of Representative Smith and others in support of this resolution. We think it's appropriate, we think it's timely, and we are here to support it. The EMCs have consumers in all but 2 of the state's 159 counties. We have roughly a little over 1.5 million homes or businesses that we provide electric service to. And being customer-owned and customer-governed, our EMC boards of directors and their management have advised Oglethorpe Power Corporation, which is their wholesale power cooperative that is presently a joint owner with Georgia Power, with MEAG Power, with the city of Dalton in generating facilities in the state at this time, coal, nuclear, and hydro. Our boards of directors have asked Oglethorpe Power Corporation, similar to what Mr. Burgess mentioned about MEAG Power, to participate in discussions for planning on what new capacity we are going to need to meet the demand of Georgia's growing population. Among the resources that we are considering, nuclear is certainly a viable option for the reasons that are stated here in this resolution. So again, we support this resolution and we appreciate your leadership in that respect.
Thank you, Mr. Verner. Any questions of Mr. Verner? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Flipping back to the other side, we have Summer Till Simpson. And if you would, please take no more than 5 minutes, and please restate your name, where you reside, and who you represent, please.
Thank you for allowing me to address you today. I'm from Atlanta. My name is Summer Till Simpson. I speak on behalf of the Georgia Conservation Voters. We are the political arm of the environmental community, and we are here today to oppose House Resolution 1365. We have heard many people express their concerns with legislation that promotes nuclear energy in the state, and GCV shares in these concerns. We oppose House Resolution 1365 because by promoting only nuclear energy, it promotes a narrow conception of alternative energy resources. There is a great potential in Georgia for cleaner, renewable energy sources, and while we oppose this resolution, we would support a resolution that more comprehensively promoted all available alternative energy sources. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions of this too? Thank you. Staying on this side, Ed Arnold, if you'd make your way to the podium. The reason why it's not back and forth every time, we had more folks signed up in opposition than in favor for, so I'm just trying to keep an even balance. But Mr. Arnold, if you wouldn't mind when you get to the podium, try to keep it under 5 minutes, and please restate your name, where you reside, and who you represent. Go ahead.
Yes, I will, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. My name is Ed Arnold. I'm the Executive Director of the Georgia Chapter of Physicians for Social Responsibility. I applaud the committee and the bringer of the resolution to be concerned about global warming.
Could you state where you reside, please?
Certainly. I reside in Atlanta. You're welcome. Global warming and the health effects of air that come from our coal-fired power plants, as well as the carbon dioxide. We're facing considerable health problems from that source. What we do with Physicians for Social Responsibility, we're a chapter of a national organization with over 30,000 members, and we bring the public health perspective, the health lens, to public policy issues. And I haven't heard that addressed. I know that you heard from the NEI, but I would encourage you, before stepping forward with this, to hear from someone in the medical field who has devoted their career especially. There's a man in North Carolina by the name of Stephen Wing who's done a lot of research on the health impacts of nuclear contamination. And in terms of the cradle to grave, so to speak, concerns, if you consider the health impacts to miners of the uranium that is burned in these plants, and the potential health impacts of the waste, I just encourage you to take a look at that. I so hate to see an august body such as the Georgia General Assembly rush to decision on a very important issue like this without considering the host of factors that need to be considered in such a measure. So I would encourage you to put this off. We'd be happy to work with you in the coming months and year to bring a holistic view, including the health lens, to this issue. So I encourage you to reject this resolution at this time.
Thank you. If you would, I do have a question for you. Dr. Arnold, is that?
No, I'm not a physician.
Okay.
I do administrative work and health education work for BSR.
All right. Representative Forrester.
Thank you, sir. Just out of curiosity, would you be in favor of shutting down Vogel and Plant Hatch?
Well, that's a question I'm not prepared to answer today. I think that that they are in service. I'm not aware that there are any problems associated currently with their operation, but that's just a guarded answer, a cautionary answer. I would not immediately ask anybody to shut down those plants right now.
Well, are you concerned with the health effects of the operation of Vogel and Plant Hatch in Georgia?
Currently, I'm not aware of any issues that are serious enough, particularly in comparison with the coal plants that are running, to shut them down right now.
Thank you.
Okay, Representative Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank for the committee's indulgence. I was multi-booked this afternoon over in Ways and Means, and that's the reason I've been going back and forth. It's not for lack of interest in this in this resolution or lack of being interested in what the speakers have said. I appreciate the gentleman's comments. You asked us to hold on this resolution. I'm just curious. Resolutions are made up of a series of whereases. Which of those whereases do you find disagreement with? Because this is not a binding resolution. We're asking them to consider. I'm trying to find out.
My understanding is that you're urging them to proceed with the licensing of new plants?
No, the resolution reads, urging electric utilities to consider building new nuclear power plants in Georgia. It's not telling them to hurry along with the licensing or anything else. It's urging them to consider it in Georgia and the Public Service Commission to take appropriate steps to encourage this policy and for other purposes. And that's what we're urging, and then we have the whereases that are sort of the reasons why we think it's or the supporters of this resolution would think that is important. I'm just curious if we missed anything in the three whereases in there, so that we would not be interested in having more power sources in the state of Georgia.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your pointing that out. I hadn't picked up the consider portion of that. I would considering that we could immediately move to reduce our exposure to the deleterious effects of power production through conservation means. There are federal agencies that say that something like 47% of our current power production could be allayed through conservation measures. Let me just return with a question, sir. Has this committee urged the PSC to consider requiring the utilities to incorporate conservation means in their unified power approach to our future?
They have been taking those steps over the years, my understanding from the PSC. You may want to add, do you want to add anything to that?
question. I'm not sure that I've only been in the body for 4 years. I don't recall, and on this committee for 2. I don't recall us urging the PSC to tell the power companies conserve. But I believe when you talk about the federal government identifying that conservation can take place, I don't think it's about the power companies conserving. I think it's about you and I conserving. There are things. I mean, I'm the sponsor of a tax credit. This is not related to electricity, but yes, this legislative body is doing many things, I think, to encourage the reduction in greenhouse gases. We have a teleworking tax credit bill where we're encouraging people to work from home when at all possible in 12 days a month. So yes, I think this is one of many arrows that we are trying to put in our quiver in order to answer Georgia's energy needs. And I understand your reservations. I'm just trying to look at the findings in the resolution and see if you differ, if we've missed anything on the findings in the resolution.
Yeah, I think it's just the perception, the public perception. I mean, if you're stepping ahead asking them to consider this, I think that there's whether it states so in the fine print or not, I think that there's a sense that you're asking for more nuclear power plants. Just a public perception thing. And I know there's a lot of air in that, and it's gray, but I really think that let's study this carefully, considering all the aspects of it before moving ahead, even to ask them to consider this, because we know that we can get health benefits right now through conservation measures, increased ones.
Thank you. Let me just make one final comment.
Certainly.
Maybe this will help ease your mind on a comment you made earlier, or a reservation you had earlier about us moving along in a direction that some of us may not have had much experience with. But I look around the members of this committee, and we've all had some experience in exposure to nuclear information. And I would point out that 2 of our members, starting with Representative Amerson, I believe is or almost is a nuclear physicist and has instructed such on a collegiate level, and Representative Forrester was in the nuclear Navy and is degreed in that area also. So these 2 gentlemen, they do know of which they speak when they talk about this subject. So I just wanted to say that to ease some of your concern.
Okay, thank you for that. And I would just ask, do you have any members who are health experts?
Yeah, we do have some doctors and pharmacists.
I'd be happy to find out what studies
thank you
have been
for
done
coming up here, Mr. Arnold. And
Okay.
No other questions. We'll move on to.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you to Sarah Smith. And if you would try to keep it under 5 minutes. It's about 5:45, and if we could, we'd like to try to get out of here around 6 because they'll be shutting us down before too long. But please state your name, where you reside, and who you represent.
Yes, I'm Sarah Smith, Atlanta. I don't represent anyone except I'm just a private citizen.
Okay.
Don't have a dog in this fight, as they say, whatsoever. I don't either side. But I did grow up in Tennessee many years ago when the Hartsville plant that Mrs. Honecker has referred to was up and coming and then was stopped. So I guess I've sort of had an interest in this all my life, pretty much. I recently read an article that in South Africa, University of Johannesburg, they've come up with this advanced form of solar panels. And these little panels are 1/20th the size of our hair. They have been working on energy problems just like all of us have for many, many, many years in South Africa. And this apparently is their answer now. And a German company talking to the whole, the other side of it, a German company has already bought into this method. All of this said is I just think as a private citizen there are so many more possible ways that we could be exploring here. I know many of your hearts are already set on this, it sounds like, but I just agree with the gentleman. Let's give a diversity. Let's give nuclear its part, but let's also give solar. Let's give the wind that they're trying to do off the coast of Savannah. Let's give the bio that they're doing down, I guess, I'm not sure if you're referring to Plains, Georgia, but you've got an abundance of peanuts. That's how diesel fuel was first invented. I mean, this whole state could be run on diesel fuel, all of your automobiles. You've got the pine trees that could be used for alternative fuels. So I think I'm just in agreement with this. Is such an important issue to the taxpayers who are going to be paying pretty heavily for this. It is such an important issue for our environment. Once you've got nuclear waste, as this lady said, that goes on for the half-life goes on for millions of years. As Mr. Forrester, Representative Forrester, you seem to know a lot about this. It goes on forever, you know, and that's your children, your grandchildren, their grandchildren, and who ends up ultimately paying for all this. You're passing it on to generations to come. Now, someone asked a question, and I don't have the expertise for this, but I'd like to defer just a minute of my time to, I think is it Dr. Smith, who Mike can answer some question that was just asked, because I don't have the answer to that. Can I defer just a minute of my time to him and let him,
ma'am, answer that? In the interest of time, they can have some one-on-one conversations when we get through here, but we are sort of up against the clock here with logistics and security. With
I think it was such a pertinent question that goes to taxpayers' money. And
did you have any more comments that you'd like to make? You still have about 2 minutes.
Well, just that I would like to defer. My technical knowledge isn't that great, but I believe his is.
With all due respect, we're going to keep moving on the list with where we've been. Does anyone have?
Well,
a quick
yeah,
question?
I would like to say one more thing too. Okay.
Please go ahead. You have a minute and a half.
You gentlemen are empowered with a big responsibility here, not only to the taxpayers' money, but to their health and their future health. And you talked about the power plants in France, but you know most of Europe now is going to alternative energies. Germany, their research is going into solar. Their research is going to all these alternative energies because I think they've learned their lesson from what's happened already in Chernobyl. I taught a student once from Chernobyl, and I heard his story. It was pretty gruesome. Most of his family was affected by that. I know these power plants are supposed to be much better now. Again, I don't have that technical knowledge. I don't claim to have a dog in this fight, except that as a citizen, with the empowerment that we as citizens have given to you gentlemen, you honorable gentlemen, I think it behooves everyone to take our time. There's no rush. There's no rush in this. There's no rush that we have to, suddenly tomorrow start building power plants that are nuclear. Study solar. Study the cost effectiveness of solar. Study the cost effectiveness of your biofuels. And do really a comparison for the taxpayers that you're representing, because this is going to have a major influence for years and years and years to come here in Georgia.
You're exactly right. Thank you for those comments. Okay. I do have one question from one of our members, if you don't mind.
Yes, sir.
Vice Chairman Murphy.
Ms. Smith, now you do realize this is just a resolution, and the first part of this resolution says, urging electric utilities to consider building new nuclear power plants in Georgia and the Public Service Commission to take appropriate steps to encourage this policy and for other purposes. It's only a resolution.
Yes, sir. I do realize that. I guess it's just, and I'm just a plain old citizen, but it just seems like when suddenly all this money appears to generate this kind of thing, and then the resolution comes in the footsteps of that, it just seems like, $55 million that have been appropriated? Is that what I heard earlier somewhere? I don't know.
All right. Any other questions?
Well, no, I mean, I'm just trying to answer that. I just feel like don't rush just to the money, rush to whatever's best for the citizens in this.
You're right. You got a quick question?
Just a piece of information. As Vice Chairman of Ways and Means, I'm an ex officio member on appropriation and sit on all the appropriation subcommittee. I am not aware of any earmark in our budget to support for the taxpayers' money that has anything to do with this resolution. I feel pretty.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about wasn't there money on a federal level that's been passed?
Yeah, you're right, Representative Martin.
Is it the Public Service Commission?
There might be some on federal level. Well, is there any further questions? Thank you, Ms. Smith, for appearing. Next, jumping back to the in favor or the for side is Pam Davidson. As you approach the podium, just try to keep it less than 5 minutes, and please tell us your name again, where you reside, and who you represent.
Pam Davidson, Biomass Gas and Electric. I lied. But somebody needed someone on the pro side. I'm not here for or against this bill in particular, but I want to make myself available for questions about biomass, because biomass energy has been brought up a couple times. And I would also, like the young woman that stood up here a minute ago, defer to Dr. Smith. I don't know if you members of the committee are aware, but he is considered nationally to be an expert on energy, and not just renewables, which he happens to know a great deal about, but all types of energy. I want to just, you can shake your head and tell me if you know these things to be true or not. Are you aware that the biomass to energy is roughly, at a national level, 5.1 cents per kilowatt hour average? It's good, cheap energy. And it doesn't require any subsidies. That I or my company will never come to you and ask you for a subsidy. We don't believe in it. We're a private business, and we have invested in our technology about $20 million. But we've chosen to do that by ourselves. We're distributed energy, which is the energy of today. We want it at its source. We want to minimize transmission lines, which are costly and have caused some problems here down at the General Assembly. We're willing to take the financial liability for that plant, and we're willing to take the physical liability for that plant. Are you aware that our emissions are less than natural gas? We address the emissions issue. But more importantly today, I want you to understand that we are one of this state's most powerful, potent economic development tools. That in a conservative estimate, we can take 20% of our energy eventually, based in land values, etc., just from biomass alone in this state. Other states are doing that. California has a goal of 11%. We have a lot of biomass. Somebody planted some yellow pine in Georgia, and a lot of it. And we'd like to turn it into energy and feed that industry. We'd like to help farmers. We'd like to grow energy crops. I want to say that there's some folks in the room that have had some experience with biomass to energy. The EMCs are doing it. They're doing it well. Sure, they're doing it slowly, but they're doing it. I want to credit them today, and Mr. Chairman and the members of the committee, those of you who have supported biomass, I appreciate it so much. I do, and I appreciate your vision, and I appreciate your enthusiasm at diversifying the state's energy plan. But I want to say what I've heard out of the France story, my take-home lesson, if you will. It was about cost. In the end, it was about money, as most things are. And what they've decided to do now is to set aside a portion of their energy for renewables. But they don't have some of the things that we have. They don't have the tremendous biomass potential that this country has. They lack the land mass. So I'd like to invite you to consider biomass, please. I'll take your questions, except for Mr. Forrester, who I'm really scared of right now. One correction, that's, and I got a head cold, and I'm just not going to take you on, Ron, right now.
Don't worry.
And I didn't come against nuclear, really. So one correction. Wind, I don't argue in favor of wind, because we don't have any, really, in the state. I'm going to go on record. We have a very small potential, but it's 3.5 cents per kilowatt hour. Okay. I think there were some misquotes there as far as that.
I've got two questions for you, neither of Representative Forrester, and I will, of course, ask him to be gentle if he does decide to ask a question, but first, Representative Martin.
Okay.
I'm sure I misheard you because you said biomass doesn't come looking and ask for any subsidies.
No.
I didn't. You did not misspeak when you said that.
I want to. Well, I can't speak for the biomass industry. Well, I would say for our company.
I'm only going to make this point because I support this resolution, or will support it at a time. Mm-hmm. I support the work we've done in biomass. I just want to point out, Chairman Lewis brought a bill to Ways and Means, which we passed out.
And that's what I credited him for, and I thank him.
I understand. I just want to be clear that this legislature is supporting multiple ways to provide for Georgia's energy needs, and I just wanted to make sure that we were clear on that.
We are clear, and we appreciate it.
We have given a sales tax, if it passes the House, and it's passed Ways and Means, and if it passes the House and Senate, and the governor signs it, that will encourage the production of electricity through biomass.
That's right.
If it's through a sales tax.
If you hear nothing else, Thank you for your consideration there.
One more question, please. Representative Amerson.
We've been trying to track each other down for the last 2 days.
Okay.
How is the plant coming and coming? Didn't you tell me last year that y'all working on biomass up in that area?
Thanks for asking that question, Representative. I'm glad to answer it. And here's my answer. It is difficult to build a plant of that size without a power purchase agreement from a major utility. And the major utility, it could be argued, should buy that power because it's less expensive, it's reliable, it's a base load facility, and for all the reasons that I and myself and other folks here have said. But that's their choice. They don't have to buy it. But what I'd like to ask you is not on behalf of BG&E and that particular company and that particular incident or that
Ms.
plant
Davidson, if I can interrupt
is
just
biomass
for
in general.
second. I hate to interrupt, but we are running up against the clock, and I want to try to steer the conversation back to the nuclear resolution, if we would.
Thank you, and I appreciate your patience with me in diverting.
You really need it. Real quick, if you don't mind, Representative Forrester, it's a general question. It's a general question, he assured me, and very brief.
I just
As
want
long
to
as it's not. Go ahead.
just want to make sure I understood your opening statement. You said you lied?
All right.
Would it be better if I said I fibbed?
Thank you, Ms. Davidson. We're down to 2, and the last one on the opposition side is Krista Brewer. Is that right?
She had to leave.
Okay.
She had a previous.
Okay. All right. Then last on the for side is Steve Allen, and if you would try to keep your comments to less than 5 minutes, and restate your name, where you reside, and who you represent, please. Go ahead.
Steve Allen with Georgia Power Company. I do live here in the Atlanta area. I stand in support of H.R. 135, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you, and I want to thank Representative Smith for having the leadership to bring this resolution forward and bringing this discussion out. By 2015 to around 2016, the electric consumers in this state will need approximately 1,000 megawatts of base load generating capacity. Economical and reliable base load generating capacity. Now, as y'all know, base load capacity is a plant, a unit that can run 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. We have not built base load capacity in this state for 16 years, and it'll be another 10 years before this particular plant comes online. As we know today, the technology that's available, it'll either be coal or nuclear. Anything we do will be through the Integrated Resource Plan at the Public Service Commission. It is a 20-year plan with 3-year updates, and it is a capacity plan. The Public Service Commission will have full oversight and will certify any plant that we build. They will look at low-cost option. There's been a lot of discussion about federal subsidies. There is a 1.8 cent per kilowatt hour federal tax subsidy that would benefit the ratepayers of the state of Georgia. This electrical need is for the state of Georgia and for the citizens of the state of Georgia. If we don't get a part of that 6,000 kilowatt hours, if this plant is certified by the Public Service Commission, I would say that some other states will probably get this. That's all I have to say, Mr. Chairman, and thank you again for bringing forward this resolution.
All right, thank you. I have 2 questions for you, Mr. Allen. First is Representative Bob Smith.
Mr. Allen, could you explain to me what 1,000 megawatts, and put it in a perspective where I can understand it, number of houses, number of towns, or whatever, a population of 1 million people?
I've been told that a megawatt is approximately what it takes to serve a super Walmart store. So it'd be 1,000 super Walmart stores running 24 hours a day, all day long. every day of the year.
All right. Next is Representative Forrester.
See, Mr. Allen, nuclear plant size generally is anywhere from close to 1,000 megawatts to 1,200 or so,
Right.
1,400. Coal plants similar. What do you consider a baseload plant? Is there a size basis as far as looking to develop a plant? I mean, would you look at spending money to develop a 200 megawatt plant versus a 1,200 megawatt plant? I mean, is that taken into consideration?
Yes, sir, it is. And on the nuclear side, if we went with the nuclear option, the Public Service Commission approved it, it would be a 1,000 megawatt plant at the Vogel site, which was originally designed, I believe, has been stated earlier, for a 4-unit plant, and it would be there on site, and it would probably be a Westinghouse design.
And my other question is, does Georgia Power have a green power policy, and do you consider nuclear power green power? I know there's a definition of green power as far as emissions go, or
typically green power comes from other sources than nuclear, representative. Our green power program will start up this fall with a landfill methane in DeKalb County. And the green power program gives the consumer the option to pay for a block of power. It's usually a little more expensive than, say, 100 kilowatt hours from other sources, but it gives the consumer that option to pay a little more for that green power.
Thank you.
Okay, one last question by Representative Smith.
I had to ask you about the locations at Vogel and Plant Hatch. How many towers or how many generating facilities can you build on the existing lands that are currently owned by these two facilities, and how much at these two locations, and how much generation could we get from these two locations, and the economy of scale? Talk to that.
At Plant Vogel, there's an opportunity to put 2 more units down there, so that would approximately be 2,000 more megawatts. Excuse me, because it already has a water supply there, and the transmission lines are there. We'd have to build additional cooling towers, water supply, switching station, substation, those kind of things. I'm not sure at Plant Hatch what land is available down there to add to that. If we do a coal plant or a power, any other plant, it will have to be at a new site. It will have to be at a new water source. It'll have, if it's coal, it'll have to have a rail line. It will have to have new transmission lines. So this site is already there, and it's already been accepted by the community. In fact, the community is encouraging us to continue to build down there.
Final question. Since this facility is already in both of these locations, then the chances of not being approved for it or being able to move more quickly would be more likely because of this economy of scale. How long would it take to build these 2 towers with the approval process included?
2 units.
Approval process and the construction time.
Well, the first unit will go online in 2015 through 2016. It would take approximately 6 years.
So it would take you 10 years to go from...
Well, right, with the planning, the engineering, the site work, the regulatory requirements, the licensing, and then the actual construction and startup would take from starting next year to...
So herein lies the reason that cost overruns are constant. And some of the comment earlier about the cost overruns going to the ratepayers is because of more regulation. It's layer after layer that continues to surface on a daily basis. Is that possible at the cost overrun?
Yes, possible.
So is there some way that we could shorten this timeline?
Yes, sir. As Representative Forrester mentioned earlier, the new plant designs are a standard design. It's a package plant. Once you contract with the company, say Westinghouse, then you have contracted for a pre-approved design, a pre-approved plant. And they will actually come and bring that plant or build that plant on site. The commission would have to approve that plant, and they'd also have to approve the prudency of the construction of that plant prior to any of those costs going into the Georgia Power rate base. But it is different than it was during the Vogel years, where you design and construct your own plant. And of course, 3 Mile Island came in right in the middle of that, and there were a lot of field design changes that occurred during that time, as well as double-digit inflation in the late 70s.
All right. Thank you for those comments, Mr. Allen. We have finished, but in deference to, we still have one elected official here in the audience. Commissioner Everett, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to add? I'll give you about 60 seconds if you can do it in that amount of time.
Thank you.
That's once you get to the podium.
For speaking up a moment ago, what I thought I had said was 40,000 metric tons, but I was instructed I said 40, and that's wrong. It is 40,000 metric tons, and I wanted to apologize for that. As far as any other thing, I just want to make sure that the people and you realize what we are charged with is to get the cheapest electrical power to the people of the state of Georgia, and not just one or two groups. And to me, that is nuclear, simply because the fact, as I had stated earlier, including the plant, not just power production, but including the plant, including the interest on the money, including the depreciation, including the O&M, everything. Nuclear is still cheaper than any other baseload plant that the Georgia Power has, and that includes gas and fossil fuel.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Chair recognizes Representative Martin. Which one are you, number 8?
I'm number 8, Mr. Chairman. If it's appropriate, I'd like to make a motion.
It would be appropriate this time.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate everybody's comments, and again apologize for me having to be in and out from Ways and Means, but I would at this time move do pass on House Resolution 1365, identified by LC 340619.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion from members of the committee? Hearing none, all in favor of House Resolution 1365 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, the same. Ayes have it. Let me express my gratitude to all of you who stuck it out. I appreciate it, and all the testimony we had from our audience out there. Thank you very much. We stand adjourned.